You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle or me at leadersandlegends.net. And as always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. We have an incredibly special guest for what is our 300th interview. The 52nd governor of Indiana, Mike Braun, who altered my career twice. I need to learn not to go up against Mike Braun, because in 2018, I did the PR for Luke Messer when he was running in the Senate primary and got beaten by Mike Braun. And in 2024, I did the PR for Suzanne Crouch in the Republican primary for governor, got beaten by Mike Braun. But he has graciously given us some time today. Thank you, Governor.
You're very welcome.
Before I get into anything, because I did a bunch of research, and obviously Molly was wonderful in giving me some hints, some tips. But I don't want to miss out on this. And it's very quick. Where would you be without Maureen Braun?
Well, it would have been thick-headed not to be, because I've known her since we were 6 years old. So we were only a few letters apart in many homerooms from grade school all the way through high school. Her maiden name is Berger, B-U-R-G-E-R. So we had that proximity. And we were at a great public education system in Jasper, a community known for its probably the most densely Catholic per capita by far in the state of Indiana. And I've always talked about faith, family, and community, and we were both lucky to be from that community. And so I'll never forget when we got married, and I've told the story often because it's true. We were at a slightly above average Catholic wedding. I think that had 650 people in a community of
full mass.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Everything was full mass. Grade school, it was Latin mass. It's called the St. Joseph's Catholic grade school. And I think it was actually a public school where the bishop and the local school district made a deal, which happened a lot back then. Right. Imagine the circuits that would break in this day and age. But we come from that kind of community, and we didn't really socialize much until the second half of our senior year. But she's been a wonderful life partner, and we moved back to our hometown mutually when we were going to follow my career to Wall Street. And she wanted her own business, and we definitely wanted to raise a family. And living in Boston for 2 years, we did not appreciate how good our roots were. And that's when, even in a business education, rather than being a captain of industry, entrepreneurialism started to really drive maybe your thought process. And she wanted her own business. So we remember that big Catholic wedding that almost needed a U-Haul hauling your wedding presents back home. And she actually could make her own clothes back in high school and wanted a clothing store. And she worked for 2 clothing companies in Boston until she thought, well, there's 6 or 7 of them already in town. There weren't many gift stores, sized up the market. And she's now completed 46 years with her own business as her only job at 505 Main Street, a half block south of the courthouse. So that's how it all ended up. But without her, I mean, the journey obviously wouldn't be what it has been. And if you listen to her at the inauguration, and again, I'm getting upstage, just like at that big wedding, they kept telling me how lucky I was. I was trying to see if she was getting any of that. She was just 4 feet away, couldn't hear any of it. And she confirmed later a few people said that. So,
well, is it also true? Because I've heard this story. I should say that Governor and Maureen Braun were married in 1976. They have 4 children. I want to get back to that for just one second, but my understanding is that your career started in the school board, your sort of small p political career where you've run for office.
Yes.
But it's very possible we could
26 years after we moved back to our hometown. So that was in 2004.
And you served until 2014. But
Yep.
I was told by our crack investigative staff here at Leaders and Legends podcast that you were not the first choice. So therefore, I could be talking to Governor Maureen Braun.
Yeah. What's true? Again, she was, we have 3 townships that play into our Jasper school district. And we lived in the most rural of the 3. The one constitutes basically the town of Jasper. And then there was another rural township, but you had to recruit someone to get on the board. You had to be careful. If you said yes, you were on it even before the election because you had to recruit. And I'll never forget, she was politely getting to the right place that she didn't have time to do it. Let's see, we still had 2 in high school at that point, one getting ready to graduate and one that was a freshman, and 2 sons that already gotten out of high school, but she was so involved in her community, always a go-to person. And so I was going to crack a joke like, oh, dear, why didn't you get on the school board? You got plenty of time. Until literally she says, I told you politely, I can't do it. Maybe my husband would be interested. And I jumped off the couch. It was too late and said, I'll think about it, and decided to do it that following Monday.
Was it informative in any way? Was it in a situation where you're like, we have all these, maybe it's different in Jasper.
Yeah.
I went to IPS. So that's a whole nother podcast actually, but you had divergent opinions, divergent life experiences. What did being on the school board, I hate to say teach you?
Well, first of all, we'll tell you if you got a temperament for public service. They weren't as maybe engaging, as rowdy as they are now. Basically, it would have been a disciplinary issue of a kid that was from a family that didn't think there should have been any consequences for bad behavior. And you had to get through that. Then it was almost entirely budget issues. And we were such a well-endowed school district. But even when I got on the board, I could see that we were living way beyond our means, and probably taxpayers would have been surprised some of the stuff we were doing. And I brought that fiscal common sense approach to it. And I think that kind of corrected what needed to be corrected. We were maybe building way ahead of when you actually needed it. So we kind of got that in balance. And of course, it should be about putting resources into the classroom, teachers, and getting, good results from it. So there was a task there, but we weren't discussing, like through COVID, masking kids or CRT, other theories that come in. And I'm one that's always, even in building a business, come from kind of the understated underdog status in the world of competition. And I think it prepared me well even for it. And finance was always my easy subject. And being an entrepreneur, you had to think broadly. So I'm glad I did it. And I'm nearly certain if I had not, we wouldn't be here today discussing what we're going to discuss here in the rest of the podcast.
How does being a husband and a father inform your thoughts on policy? But the other question I wanted to ask before, and I didn't, is to which song did you and your wife dance at your wedding?
So I think then a song by Chicago, Color My World,
Yes.
was a slow dance that you rushed to the floor. And it was generally at the tail end of a high school dance. Everybody was a wallflower, but I was enterprising enough to know that that was probably a good idea.
Great song.
And there would have been several others, but that's the one that stands out during that time period. So,
And being a father and being a husband give you a better sense. I remember telling people, my former boss, Greg Ballard, that so much of what he did or wanted to do for Indianapolis was informed because he had college-age kids who were saying, Dad, when I get out of IU, which is where they both went, I want to move to a city that has X, Y, and Z. And so the mayor worked really hard to give young people sort of those amenities that they were looking for. Would that say that? So
raising a family, again, I always talk about how lucky we were to have grown up in Jasper, to be dropped into that community in a state like Indiana, because we've got them speckled around the state. Of course, we got 70 to 75 counties that are trying to find their next act, that had maybe a manufacturing industry in town. But if it doesn't start with faith and family, I think you're probably moored not in the correct way. And then you broaden it out to community. And that is kind of where all our values were set. But when we chose not to go to Wall Street because she was going to come with me, I don't know that the family part of it would have developed, because it would have been a different dynamic. And I see all the things we did, from Little League to I played 3 sports back in high school. And that was my main priority, along with maybe girls later on in high school. And I was lucky I could always get through the basics when you needed to talk about your report card, but that wasn't my main interest. But all of that amalgamated together in a place like Jasper was just an unbelievable foundation. And 4 kids, 2 sons and then 2 daughters in that order. 3 of the kids run the business I ran for 37 years. 2 sons live there in Jasper. 7 grandkids. I mean, that's the American dream.
I have 2 grandkids. Aren't they a joy?
They are, because you got all the fun moments without the housekeeping part of it.
You get them all riled up and then you just leave.
Yeah.
Mike Braun was a member of the Wabash class of 76. He was student body president. He was a member of the Jasper High School class of 72. He was class president. So campaigns are a part, big C or small c, a big part of your life. What is it about campaigning that you enjoy?
There's the analog to business. And you better get your mind right once you get down the trail. Remember, I got recruited to be on the school board. I didn't spend a penny, didn't even put out a sign. My name was on the ballot. And of course, you lived there. You didn't need to do that. And then when State Rep Mark Messmer, who's now the congressman from the 8th District, called me in late 13, early 14 to see if I'd be interested in filling his seat he was going to vacate to run for state senate. That was the first time, school boards local, 1 meeting a month. You go to 1 annual meeting in Indy. I always loved that. But that was a different commitment from right when my business was just rocking and rolling and we were becoming a national company from a regional one. And being a state senator, state rep, you're giving 2.5 months in a non-budget year, 3.5 in a budget year. That was another step. So when it came to what prepared me, if I was going to be involved in something, I would generally gravitate towards wanting to lead it, but didn't need to. So I generally would size it up and see if there was a need for better leadership. And I've only lost 1 election in my entire stretch of student government and the political world. And I was running for junior class president up against a 3-year incumbent. And you never knew the vote, but I knew some people that counted it, and they said it was pretty close. So then I had to decide, well, am I going to do it for probably the one you remember most is who's the senior class president. And then you get your competitive juices going, and did that and won as a senior. And then all those things, just like the scouting award that came from getting involved in Boy Scouts and Explorer posts, getting an Eagle Scout. I didn't know how big a deal that was until Senator Mike Enzi asked all the senators who were Eagle Scouts to take a picture. And I thought, surely in a body like that could have been, I don't know how many senators could have gotten it by then, but probably 85 or 90. Now that's changed a lot in the configuration. Sure. I love all the ways that you progress through even that kind of change, but there were only 3 or 4 of us. So I thought, wow, I thought there'd be more. And then today, being able to be at an event where you invested time, and I could have easily said, with all the other things I like to do, 3 sports, and as a kid, you've got so many ways to say no. My parents, they didn't hover over you then like they would now in terms of being like your agent for a lot of stuff, but I really value getting involved. So no campaigns there other than getting through 20, 25 merit badges, which those took time and effort. But no, then you get comfortable with it and didn't have to do much on the school board. I had to campaign because I was actually behind the guy that was had a better name ID that was running against me in DuBois County and Daviess County, Pike and Martin. But then logistics, running a logistics and distribution business, selling the customer to do business with you. There I could see the parallel, and it got to be fairly easy. And then since most of the voters I needed to encourage to vote for me were in a county that didn't know me, then am I going to put the time and effort in? And I would drag my sons along. I'd get somebody out of work that would want to give up a little paid time and go on a political adventure. So you just, if you're kind of a organizer, a leader, and you can communicate, I could see how that came into play. And a lot of that was built upon some of the stuff I'd done earlier.
We should say that Governor Mike Braun is an Eagle Scout, 1970, and he, for 6 years, held the Senate seat of another Eagle Scout, and that was Richard Lugar.
Yeah.
You were Wabash class of 76. So in my research, I had a text exchange with this fellow named Mark Miles this morning. Try to get some secrets. Because I mentioned I was at your inaugural event.
Yeah.
Not the inauguration, but your inaugural event. And you mentioned Mark Miles by name.
Yeah.
Which took me aback. I didn't know that you guys were in the same class.
Yep.
And you were the regional coordinator of the Youth for Lugar.
That's right.
In 1974 in the South. And Mark Miles was in the center, with Central Indiana. And when Mark came on the podcast, or maybe this is at one of our lunches at whatever dive Miles is at that day, because that's what he likes to eat.
Yeah.
The steer-in, the golden A's, the working man's friend. He said that he got recruited in the 74 campaign because Deborah Daniels said, hey, my brother Mitch is running this campaign. Call him. And that's how Mark Miles and Mitch Daniels and Deborah Daniels all became friends. They all went to North Central.
Yeah.
How did Mark Miles recruit you for this task? And were you ever able to tell Senator Lugar that you did this?
Better yet, I was going through a box of stuff you haul from at my parents' home to our first home once we moved back in 78 to another farmhouse that we moved into in 93, and it survived on that farm to where we live now. And it was a box of all of that. And all I can remember is there was a plastic sleeve, and I thought, gosh, this is going to be, because I couldn't see the picture. It was in a couple of them in there. Mm-hmm. I was in a white turtleneck, plaid pants, And thank goodness it wasn't in color because it was colorful. And Maureen was there, and we were at one of the few events that I didn't even really remember that. And it was, I was looking down at Lugar, Maureen was looking up, and he was dressed in like a golf outfit. And of course, he didn't win that campaign against Birch Bayh. And then the memories started flowing back. And I think one time he came to Jasper, and I remember that we just drove in a vehicle together. And when you were in a college Youth for Lugar or any campaign, it was probably as much having it out there that there was support at that level. If you remember, the campuses probably weren't well aligned with Republicans.
Not in 74, especially.
Well, we had 2 Democratic senators.
That's right.
And don't remember, other than serving with Mark, Kristen Servas was on that. I think a guy named Keith Luce. And then there's another guy with big glasses in the picture that we're still trying to ID. So that was the regional core. And I'm glad I did it. We didn't do a lot that I can recall. But again, you were doing something above and beyond what, the minimum was. And that would define, I think, what I've done throughout a life is I generally err on the side of doing it. And you can always say you don't like it once you get into it. And then so many things like moving back, getting involved in forestry because I love to hunt and fish. Finally get the piece of property to build your dream home on. Doesn't even have a public access or right of way to it. I had to explain to my wife after being so patient, fell in love with forestry, got me involved in conservation. One thing leads to another, but back then, I mean, those were some pretty turbulent political times as well. And then Dan Quayle beat Birch Bayh in 1980. And that's kind of when the political landscape started changing in Indiana. And here we are.
I should say that in 1980, Dan Quayle defeated Birch Bayh.
Yep.
Dan Quayle's campaign manager was Mark Miles. Lugar barely lost in 74 to Birch Bayh, which is shocking how close it was since Lugar's reputation was as Richard Nixon's favorite mayor.
Right.
Mark Miles to me, and I'm going to turn this into a question. Mark Miles to me is the most phenomenal leader I've ever met who hasn't been elected to office. I mean, it's remarkable.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite Hoosier leader and or legend you admire most?
So I was off the political grid literally from 74, and I'm not going to count 2004 as getting on it. That was school board. So I was off the grid from 74 to 2014. That's a lot of years. And didn't pay much attention to it other than through the frustration of building a business. And come from an area that was the second bluest county in the state, Blue Dog Democrats, which culturally and fiscally would maybe be more conservative than a lot of the legacy Republican areas. But I was always doing it kind of from that philosophical framework and did see where it was going back and forth, did start to pay a little attention when Mitch Daniels ran because he came on the kind of point in time where I think we had 16 years of Democratic governors.
Correct.
And we were a purple-red state politically, in the red financially. And what caught my attention was not politics, but it was finance. And that I didn't think our state could be in trouble financially just due to how we roll generally, and not like some of the states are currently, which buy into no fiscal control, and not going to cite any of them, but we know where they mostly are. And but I'm trying to think politically when I would have actually, I think it would have been once Messmer called me. So if I look at who I would look to as a political mentor, I didn't really have one, until I ran for Senate. And that was clearly a guy named Tom Coburn. That was the senator from Oklahoma that was always on the Morning Joe show before it maybe turned to a different point of view. But I was so impressed by the guy because he was talking about reforming healthcare, which has been my biggest passion, along with Bernie Sanders in the U.S. Senate. And even strange bedfellows like the two of us crafted the most important piece of legislation and got quick bipartisan support for, but I'll have to watch there because that was done in the last 4 to 6 months and nothing gets done quickly there. So Tom Coburn would have been, because I didn't pay enough attention to Hoosier politics to see who would have really motivated me then, other than Wabash, Youth for Lugar, and of course sat in the Lugar Senate seat. But if you're a good entrepreneur, politics is so much easier because there, when you're building a business, your financial hide is at stake. You're having to outmaneuver competitors that are playing in a very long game. Senate or governor's two hard deadlines, May and November. But I always felt, other than the fundraising, it was much easier than winning in the world of reality, building a business, the private sector. So I didn't really respect it as much. And then I noticed so many of the folks we end up respecting stay too long because until we get term limits and a balanced budget amendment, it's a failure of the people that have been leading us because it's so euphoric. It's the best job they've ever had. And for me, the best job I've ever had will be clear. It was a small business owner that got lucky enough to build it into a regional and national company. And my best paycheck, ironically, was when I became a U.S. Senator. And I don't say that often, but that's true. So that gives you a little bit to think about in terms of what the founders intended. Watching a current biopic on Thomas Jefferson, and his main fear was that we spend ourselves into prosperity through what they just created. And he was always a believer in small government. Look how far away we've gotten from that. You look at Washington, he set the stage, 2 terms, get your butt back to the farm or your business or back then, having a law practice was actually a real job that wasn't going to necessarily be a stepping stone to get into politics. So that is kind of why I come up with Tom Coburn, because then I was serious. I was dressed up all ready to go. And most people thought the most foolish thing you could do is get ahead of your skis. And politically, that would have been, after just getting elected twice as a state rep, foregoing the second year of the second term to run for U.S. Senate. That's hardly ever been done nationally or in our state. You generally come from the farm system. And I don't like the farm system. I believe in the founders, the way they intended it. Get your cred in the private sector, then maybe serve. Don't want to make a career out of it once you get there. So that's kind of gives me my political moorings. And Tom Coburn was the essence of that.
I mentioned Hoosier leader or legend you admire most. You're listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest is Indiana's Governor Mike Braun. Is there a Wabash grad you admire most or think, wow, he was really helpful? You can say Tim Kraft. He's a little bit younger than you. But if there is one, because to be candid, I have interviewed so many DePaul grads.
Yeah.
So many Wabash grads. I love to hear them talk about their experience at a small college. But how did Wabash, and then I want to ask you very quickly about Harvard Business School afterward.
Sure.
How did Wabash set you on your path?
So that's another issue. I'm highly degreed. I turned down the best business degree in the country in terms of parlaying that through the network that you just had come from. When you move back to your hometown, I'll never forget the phone call with my dad. I think I phoned it the message in instead of couldn't get home often being out there other than Christmas and maybe one other time, and told him I had a change of plans. And of course, he was so happy. I was going to Wall Street, proud of what you did there. And that would be like one of those, well, it wasn't going to be better than that. It was going to be something where you're trading down. And he said, well, son, what do you need to tell me? I said, well, probably started off, well, Maureen wants to have her own business. I took the first entrepreneur's course there, and get to the point. I don't think he said that, but I know he was thinking it. And I said, well, we're moving back home. And that's about like, well, is the next part of it going to be you want to move into the basement? So, but again, nothing in terms of what I've done would be pro forma in business or in politics. And I'd say if there's something, think out of the box, it does a lot for you. So the Wabash education or someone there, that just came into play because the Republican nominee for Senate was definitely going to be a graduate at Wabash College, Luke Messer and Todd Rokita.
That's right.
And then we always have the DePaul versus Wabash, and that's 6 of one, half a dozen of another in terms of what is a better springboard. All I can tell you there, the proudest achievement for me was getting through a tough school when that wasn't easy. And that was because I went there on a pre-med curriculum. And biology, along with 4 classmates from Jasper High School, because they had a lot of Jasper people that ended up going to Wabash. So if you wanted to become a doctor, it was probably the best place to go. Until I decided, and when I found out it was going to take 9 years of med school and specializing if you wanted to be a surgeon, I didn't have 9 years of further education in me. So at the end of my freshman year, I switched to political science, then was going to become a lawyer, because that was 3 years. But then, that I don't know that I was really interested in the Hippocratic Oath or the legal field. I was probably interested in making a living. And then it got down to where, it's a fee-based income. Then I was going to Vanderbilt, literally about like heading to Wall Street on a JD MBA, which is 4 years. That was too much further education. So I opted for 2 years. And that gets you back to the circle of what happened there. But at Wabash, it would have been all the professors that I got to meet, because I took a very broad, I was so interested in other stuff other than my major. So I took constitutional law, took calculus, and that was part of the freshman journey towards how you needed to go to, get your pre-med curriculum in order. But I remember all the different courses I took, including etymology.
Best class ever.
Yeah, and that's the one I enjoyed the most, along with philosophy. And then I started taking it on as a challenge to get good grades. And that was just one semester after another, to where that was my main goal. And it was for the challenge of doing it, and then what you're going to learn from it. But it was more the rigor of trying it than what I really remember collectively from it, other than you pick up tidbits here and there. And then it was definitely what got me into Harvard Business School, because they needed to round out the crew there. They still took 5% directly out of college back then. Now they want you to work 2 to 3 years. But I think I checked the box being from the Midwest, and enjoyed that journey for 2 years. And then look at that, switched to move back to your hometown. So I'm always a believer that you take everything you know cumulatively, but don't let it predestine you too directly, because every good thing I've done has been not an about face, but a significant course change, not all the time, but at the key forks in the road.
And we've had a few Harvard graduates on the Leaders and Legends podcast: David Frick, Al Hubbard, Ted Bohm, and their stories were remarkable. We have just a few minutes left, and I want to get to the 5 questions we ask everyone. Governor, I would like to give you just a few seconds to talk about your plan, because there's all kinds of issues, but but I want to stick to one thing. Property taxes.
Yep.
You've obviously you've traveled the state. Who knows how many times you've been to every 92 counties, multiple
every
times.
year. And some counties more than once a year.
Property taxes is kind of emerging as the big issue in the 2025 session. How important, because you've been passionate, you've been firm, you've been consistent. You've even gotten compliments from Rob Kendall. I didn't know he complimented anyone.
It's hard to do.
It is hard
but
to do.
But he was right on that, in the sense that he was hearing it, and he's got the platform to amplify it. I was hearing it over the last year nonstop, and even for those 2 years.
How important is it to you to provide the property tax relief that Hoosiers are asking for? Because it's clearly what they're asking for.
Yeah, and then it goes with all Hoosiers would think that their local school districts and their local governments are by far the most important part of the public arena. And you then get into the discussions of how do you kind of reconcile that? Well, almost all of them wear a homeowner's hat too. And remember, numbers are my forte. And I know what inflation went up. I know that you've got a growth factor that you need to have above and beyond that to move your own district, school, and local governments along. But I also know that many took advantage of an opaque system and had a windfall. Many are sitting on record balances and have bought a lot of shiny objects that you couldn't have done otherwise. And it was very simple. You should have lowered your tax rates to cover inflation and a reasonable growth rate, and not enjoyed the windfall of opaqueness. They know I'm 100% right. But once you get what you've become used to, and you've done it over 4 years, it's also hard to maybe pull back. So I hope where we end up, Senate Bill 1 was a strong message that it's a big issue. I want to give some money back to all taxpayers to reset it above the level of where that covers their inflation and a reasonable growth factor. Whether we can do that, they're wrestling. Right now, it looks like we're going to minimally get relief for the entry-level homeowner and the elderly retired. I think there should be some in between. And you shouldn't be able to, especially for the districts that weren't transparent, weren't honest, get by with it. So hopefully we'll wrestle through the rest of the session to where we get some money going back to the taxpayer that shouldn't have been taken from them in the first place. And then for sure, fix it going forward with caps based upon not circuit breakers. That worked until inflation came along, to where your levy and or your bill can't go up more than 3 to 4%. I understand all of it, and I'm going to articulate it in a way that gives them room to make a reasonable argument, but to where we acknowledge what the truth is. And hopefully the legislature and I will get there for fixing it down the road and giving some relief, especially to those most impacted over the last 4 years.
It's fair to say that Governor Braun, the Braun administration, isn't done fighting on this issue.
No. And if they know me, this will be a rodeo, but not like the first 4 of winning a primary and a general in the Senate, and then for the governor's race. So I'd put 2 and 2 together there. I know how to use the microphone, and I know how to listen, most importantly, and I will do that.
We've reached the point on the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What was your first job?
Stacking lumber at Indiana Desk. My dad had managed that place for 35 years over his career, worked there 39, and it was probably when I asked for an allowance when I got into high school, and he was going to tell me what was on the other end of receiving income. And all I can tell you, that was the hardest thing. It was in the heat of summer, and if you know what stacking a load of lumber is like, it's the same thing over and over, picking up a board, getting one layer, putting a strip in between, doing it again till you get up about as far as you can reach. And I think I only had to do it a half a day, but I learned the respect of hard work. And it told me I may want to leverage that along with your noggin down the road.
Second question, what was your first concert?
That I had to think about because I didn't go to a lot of them, but I believe it was Sha Na Na at IU because, of course, I went to Wabash, an all-male school, took the risk when my wife went to IU for 4 years. So I had to get down there enough to make sure I was observing the social scene. And that's the first one I went to. And then the one I've gone to the most of by far, and I don't go to a lot of concerts, would be the Moody Blues, which would be my favorite rock group.
You and our podcast friend, Bill Benner, he has seen the Moody Blues like 100+ times. It's
they're that good. I just heard John Lodge, who's there in their early 80s, is actually going to be at Brown County with, I don't know how much a couple of them are into the next dimension, but they're going to be in their early 80s. He's probably put a group together, and it's a concert that's going to be in Brown County. I'm going to look into that. I haven't decided where to go, but I've been to 5, 6, or 7 of them.
Favorite Moody Blues song?
Most people are going to say Nights in White Satin. I'm going to probably say Ride My Seesaw.
If you could recommend any book for someone to read, which book would you choose?
Well, this would be one that's going to go back to my acquaintance with, because I think it's so important. Senator Coburn, his book entitled The Debt Bomb, which, to me, how you can be so confident and then moving to where you're just getting into the realm of extreme hubris to think that you'd borrow money from our kids and grandkids or your latest and greatest political idea at the federal level when you've knocked nothing discernibly out of the park in the last 3 to 4 decades. And I'm an equal opportunity complainer of how it got started. It got started when Ronald Reagan cut taxes, but didn't do anything with spending. It was chump change then, tens of millions and maybe hundreds of millions. But we got used to trying to do something that is so easy politically, but didn't attend to the other side of the equation. It didn't really get on steroids until the year 2000. And we haven't balanced the budget at the federal level since the tail end of the Clinton years when Newt Gingrich was there. And when we're borrowing at the clip of now $2 trillion a year, I was the loudest voice on it in the U.S. Senate. It was like talking to the side of my big white barn back home. That is shameful. So that book would be very analytical and eye-opener in terms of why future generations, the ones that are going to have to pay the bills, ought to get involved and say enough is enough.
Number 4, if you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
That would be without question the core of discovery. It would have been on that 2.5 year trip when Thomas Jefferson told Lewis and Clark, check it out. That romantically to me, when I know how miserable that would have been.
Oh, absolutely.
When you had no power equipment, you were portaging, but when I just think loving the natural landscape, being a conservationist, my favorite pastime is by far strolling our hardwood forests. I've turned that into a sideline business. It would have been to be on that. And when I think only one person lost his life doing it, that's a modern miracle. So
we should note that Governor Braun has William Clark's brother in portrait behind him, George Rogers Clark.
Yeah.
Last question, when I think he's receiving the surrender at Vincennes from the British. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours completely off the record to talk about anything you want, whom would you choose?
Well, I mean, I've been so intertwined with what you see going on in D.C. Trump came in 4 times for me, if you recollect, back in 2018, because it was not going to be a good night for Republicans if we didn't get back Missouri and Indiana.
And Joe Donnelly was a hell of an opponent.
He was a heck of an opponent. He was a nice guy. And I think he got in there because of how careful you need to be against giving any snippet an opportunity to be turned into. And I've got involved so much in media with the first impeachment.
Right.
When I jumped out with no guidance other than I wasn't going to let Chuck Schumer get to the microphones first. I think about that.
He'll never give them up once he gets there.
No, but I was talking to John Barrasso, the senator from Wyoming, who's in charge of communications. Somebody ought to get down there and at least make a case why it's a weak one. And if he wasn't going to go along, I was going to go there. I'll never forget, that's one of those moments. Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, said, "Hey, Braun, what are you talking about?" Right on the threshold of the Senate chamber. Said, "I think one of us ought to go down there and counterpoint." And he said, "What?" I said, "On the impeachment." "Yeah, I'll go with you, Braun." And I looked at Barrasso. He said, "I'll go with you too, Mike." So I, as a freshman senator, not too long into that term, went down there. So the whole thing with Trump coming down the escalator, I didn't figure it out when he came onto the scene. Remember, I thought you had to be from the farm system of politics. Mm-hmm. He represents the opposite, thank goodness. He engenders so much dislike from the people that want to preserve a broken system, even some within our own party. But you needed that. I can tell you, if there's one thing from this podcast, that place is broke, literally and morally and functionally. And until we get back to what the founders intended, it's going to get worse before it gets better. So you might think this is going to get at talking to President Trump. I've done enough of that, and I consider that an honor to be part of it. It would be probably his current advisor, Elon Musk, and he, again, is someone out of central casting. I look at all the things that have kind of punctuated the transition from the establishment running things, running it into the ground, and someone like Trump coming along, reading at least 50% plus some margin of the electorate, having a style that would throw people off because it's not the normal one. But I think it was given the second motion when he ran here this past November. So I have not met Elon. I would love to do that. And I am just rooting them on about doing one thing: get rid of waste and fraud. And if you're in a position where you're defending that, like many are now, to not do so, that is a broken system. So I'm going there this weekend because the governors are meeting with Trump, and I'll be talking to him, and maybe I'll be able to have a quick conversation with Elon Musk, because we either take the country back and we acknowledge that the government's there to do some things. Republicans have not been fiscal conservatives to date because they get so enamored with a military that doesn't even pass an audit. Neocons and defense hawks make the deal with all the spendthrift Democrats that are unapologetic about it. And here we are. Future generations need to be worried. So maybe that'll happen this weekend. Nothing planned.
I've written speeches for federal candidates, and the line that I always use is, you want to drain the swamp? The tax code is the swamp.
Yes, exactly.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast sponsored by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise. And as a U.S. Army veteran, I thank you for all you did for veterans and continue to do. Like always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Our guest today, Governor Mike Braun, thank you so much for your time, and we hope to be able to come back and talk to you again a little later in your term.
It'd be my pleasure to do so, and it was a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.
This podcast was produced and edited by Chris Spangle and Leaders and Legends, LLC. If you're interested in starting a podcast or taking yours to the next level, please contact us at leadersandlegends.net.